My clinic, Willa's Animal Sanctuary, was my pride and joy, a meticulously kept space that smelled faintly of antiseptic, lavender, and the comforting earthiness of contented animals. For years, I'd maintained a quiet rhythm there, a well-oiled machine of appointments, surgeries, and the endless, fulfilling work of caring for creatures great and small. My dark hair was perpetually pulled back in a practical bun, my gaze usually serious, analytical, missing little. I favored sensible scrubs and a lab coat, prioritizing function over flair. Change, frankly, wasn't something I actively sought. My routine was my anchor, a steady hand in a world often unpredictable. Then came the unexpected surge in demand. My small, dedicated team, though efficient, was stretched thin. The necessity of hiring a new veterinary assistant loomed, a disruption to my carefully cultivated order. I posted the ad, bracing myself for a parade of hopefuls, most of whom, I suspected, wouldn't quite grasp the quiet intensity required for this work. Skyler arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a soft rain tapping against the clinic windows. She was punctual, dressed simply in dark trousers and a crisp, light blue blouse. Her light brown hair, I noted, had subtle, almost imperceptible highlights, and framed a face that was both composed and genuinely kind. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, not aloof, but self-assured. My initial assessment, as always, was dispassionate, professional. I watched her closely, searching for the telltale signs of inexperience or a lack of true empathy. During the interview, Skyler spoke with a gentle clarity, her voice even and calm. Her questions were insightful, demonstrating not just knowledge, but a thoughtful curiosity that impressed me. She inquired about our surgical protocols, our approach to palliative care, even the clinic's philosophy on client education. But it was during the practical assessment that Skyler truly distinguished herself. A small, terrified stray kitten, found shivering under a bush, had been brought in just an hour before. It cowered in its carrier, hissing at anyone who dared approach. I watched as Skyler, without prompting, knelt slowly beside the carrier. She didn't rush, didn't force. Instead, she spoke in a soft, murmuring tone, a melody of comfort that seemed to coax the kitten from its fear. Her hands, I observed, were steady, almost artistic, as she gently coaxed the kitten out, slowly, carefully, her touch light and reassuring. The kitten, after a few hesitant moments, tentatively rubbed its head against her fingers. I saw the quiet compassion in her eyes, a depth of feeling that transcended mere professional duty. It was a rare quality, one I cherished. I noticed the way a stray strand of her light brown hair fell across her cheek as she leaned down, the soft curve of her profile. She didn't seem to notice my scrutiny, entirely focused on the tiny creature in her hands. As she meticulously outlined her previous experience, discussing complex cases with an almost innate understanding, I felt a shift within me. My initial skepticism began to dissolve, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement. This wasn't just another applicant. Skyler possessed a rare blend of competence and compassion, a quiet strength that promised not disruption, but a different kind of enrichment. Despite my ingrained preference for the familiar, for the predictable, I found myself thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, my carefully constructed world could benefit from this quiet light. I offered her the position. Skyler joined the clinic the following Monday. The initial days, I'll admit, were a test of my own adaptability. I'm a creature of habit, and even the smallest change can feel like a pebble in a well-oiled machine. But Skyler, to her credit, integrated herself with a remarkable fluidity that genuinely surprised me. It wasn't just her efficiency, though that was undeniable. It was the quiet grace with which she moved through the organized chaos of a busy veterinary practice. From the very first morning, her presence was a steadying force. She seemed to anticipate needs before they were voiced, prepping instruments, restocking supplies, always a step ahead. I watched her closely, my internal monologue detailing every observation. She was meticulous, ensuring every cage was spotless, every bandage precisely applied. Her notes were clear, concise, and incredibly thorough, a reflection, I thought, of a mind that paid attention to detail. But it wasn't just the technical aspects that impressed me. It was her interactions with the animals. I saw her gently murmuring to a terrified Labrador mix during a vaccination, her voice a low, soothing cadence that seemed to calm the dog almost instantly. She had an innate ability to connect, an intuitive understanding of their anxieties. Once, during a delicate surgery, I observed her prepping the incision site. Her hands were steady, precise, moving with a focused calm that mirrored my own. I remember thinking, she truly understands the delicate balance of life and care. I started noticing the smaller things too, the sensory details that began to subtly paint her into the fabric of my days. There was a faint, clean scent that seemed to cling to her, something reminiscent of lavender, a gentle fragrance that wasn't overpowering but always present. I observed the way the morning light, filtering through the window above the prep station, caught the fine strands of her light brown hair, giving it an almost ethereal glow as she focused intently on her task. I also noticed the soft crinkling at the corners of her eyes when she smiled at a recovering kitten, a genuine warmth that was both comforting and infectious. Our professional synchronicity became undeniable, almost effortless. We developed a silent language of glances and gestures, anticipating each other's next move without needing words. During a particularly challenging emergency case involving a stray cat hit by a car, we worked as one unit, our movements complementing each other perfectly. There was a quiet intensity in the room, a shared purpose that transcended our individual roles. Afterwards, as the cat rested comfortably, recovering, we exchanged a look of mutual exhaustion and satisfaction. It was a silent acknowledgement of a job well done, a shared success. I found myself increasingly appreciating not just Skyler's skill, but her steady, thoughtful presence. She brought a new kind of quiet efficiency to the practice, yes, but also a warmth, a subtle infusion of gentleness that I hadn't realized was missing. My clinic, once a place I considered perfectly balanced, now felt more complete. It was a feeling I hadn't anticipated, and one I found myself quietly, unexpectedly cherishing. As the weeks turned into a couple of months, the comfortable hum of our professional partnership began to subtly shift. The boundaries, once so clearly defined by sterile surfaces and medical charts, started to soften, blurring into something warmer, more personal. Our shared coffee breaks, initially brief and focused on the day's schedule, gradually stretched longer. They evolved organically, transforming into discussions about our lives beyond the confines of the clinic. I found myself learning about Skyler's quiet passions, her love for hiking in the state parks, the way she found solace in old books, and her dedication to volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends. She spoke with a gentle enthusiasm, her eyes brightening when she described a challenging trail or a particularly moving passage from a novel. Her voice was always calm, but I started to pick up on the subtle modulations that hinted at deeper emotions. I noticed the way she'd often push a stray hair behind her ear when she was thinking, a small, unconscious gesture. In turn, I found myself sharing small anecdotes about my own life, things I rarely disclosed. I talked about my initial struggles building the clinic, the satisfaction of seeing a long-term patient thrive, even a quirky habit my childhood dog had. These weren't grand confessions, but small windows into my world, offered without conscious effort, a natural response to Skyler's genuine interest. It was new territory for me, this casual, light-hearted exchange that began to punctuate our workdays. I was used to being the stoic professional, the one who kept a careful distance. But with Skyler, it felt natural to let a little of that guard down. The laughter came more easily, too. A clumsy puppy chasing its tail, a particularly demanding client, a silly mistake I made measuring out medication. These moments became shared jokes, creating a lightheartedness that was a welcome counterpoint to the seriousness of our work. I found myself smiling more, my own expression softening as I watched her. It was during one such conversation, over lukewarm coffee, that Skyler mentioned Mark, her boyfriend. "Mark and I are thinking of trying out that new trail next month," she said, almost as an aside, while discussing her weekend plans. The name, Mark, landed with a subtle, unidentifiable sensation in my chest, a fleeting, almost imperceptible tightness. I quickly rationalized it as merely concern for her happiness, a friend's natural interest. I told myself I was simply glad she had someone, that her life was full. But I also noticed the careful way she talked about him. It wasn't overly effusive, nor was it distant. There was a hint of something in her tone, a slight hesitation, a subtle guardedness that I couldn't quite place. It was fleeting, easily missed if one wasn't paying close attention. And I, ever the observer, was paying attention. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the warmth of the coffee cup in my hands, trying to ignore the subtle shift I felt within myself, a quiet recognition that this friendship was beginning to mean more to me than I had consciously realized. The lines between our professional and personal lives, once merely blurred, now felt softly, inextricably interwoven. A comfortable intimacy had settled between us, unspoken but deeply felt. It manifested in the smallest gestures, a knowing glance exchanged across the operating room when a difficult procedure went smoothly, a shared, quiet laugh over a particularly mischievous kitten, or the way we'd instinctively reach for the same instrument, our fingers brushing, a fleeting, almost imperceptible contact that felt like a gentle, unplanned moment between us. I found my thoughts turning to Skyler more often than I'd anticipated, not just during work hours, but long after I'd locked up the clinic for the night. I'd catch myself replaying moments from our day, the way the sunlight, even on a cloudy afternoon, seemed to find the subtle golden strands in her light brown hair, illuminating it like a halo as she bent over a patient. Or the earnest, focused expression on her face when she was explaining a complex diagnosis to a worried pet owner, her voice calm and reassuring. I remembered the soft curve of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she was truly amused. I started to recognize the depth of my own attention to her, this profound focus that felt like a quiet regard. It was more than mere friendship. It was an undeniable, gentle connection. The quiet awareness of Skyler's presence felt steady and comforting, a gentle constant in my days. When she stood beside me, the subtle scent of lavender that always seemed to cling to her would fill my senses, making the air around us feel calm, different. My internal world, once so orderly and predictable, became a quiet stir of unfamiliar emotions. This realization of my affection for Skyler was like a sudden, unexpected soft breeze, a gentle shift in the quiet landscape of my life. It was warm, uncertain, and deeply confusing. Guilt immediately followed, a cold wave washing over the warmth of my nascent feelings. She had a boyfriend, a man she'd mentioned with a quiet, if sometimes guarded, affection. This thought, this fundamental truth, was a constant, sharp counterpoint to the blossoming tenderness in my own heart. I tried to push the unfamiliar emotions down, to rationalize them away as mere platonic admiration, a deep appreciation for a skilled colleague. I told myself it was simply the bond of shared work, of navigating the intense highs and lows of our profession together. But the feelings persisted, stubborn and insistent. The thought of jeopardizing our connection, of disrupting the careful balance we had found, was terrifying. More than that, the thought of exposing my own vulnerability, of revealing this raw, unexpected part of myself, felt like standing on a precipice. So, I kept it all carefully hidden, locked away behind the stoic professionalism that had always been my shield. I maintained my composure, every action measured, every word chosen with deliberate care, desperately hoping that no one, especially not Skyler, would ever see the profound, quiet stir brewing beneath my calm exterior. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a rare stretch of quiet for me. The clinic was closed, the emergency calls few. I decided to indulge in a small luxury, a leisurely trip downtown to browse the independent bookstore I favored, hoping to find a new psychological thriller to lose myself in. The city was bustling, a pleasant murmur of conversations and street performers filling the autumn air. I walked slowly, enjoying the freedom from routine, the chance to simply observe. As I approached my favorite cafe, the one with the large bay window perfect for people watching, I paused, considering a coffee. My gaze drifted idly towards the interior, seeking out an empty table. And then I saw them.
Mark.
Skyler's boyfriend. He was seated at a small, intimate table, his back partially to me, but there was no mistaking his profile. Opposite him sat a woman, her head thrown back in laughter, a cascade of dark hair falling over her shoulders. The scene unfolded before me in excruciatingly slow motion, like a film reel played at half speed. His hand, I noticed, rested casually on her lower back, a gesture too familiar, too possessive for a mere acquaintance. They leaned into each other, their heads close, murmuring words I couldn't hear but whose intimacy was palpable. The way they looked at each other, the easy, comfortable way their fingers brushed as she picked up her coffee cup, it left no room for doubt. This was not a casual lunch. This was a private world, one that excluded Skyler entirely. A sudden, sharp coldness spread through my stomach, replacing the easy warmth of the afternoon. It was a visceral reaction, a complex swirl of emotions. Anger for Skyler, for the quiet trust one knew she placed in him, was immediate. But beneath that, a raw, conflicted jolt, a sudden, almost selfish surge of something I couldn't quite name, mixed with the profound shock of what I was witnessing. My breath caught in my throat. My mind, usually so clear and analytical, raced. The implications were immediate, stark. Mark, the man Skyler had spoken of with a soft, quiet affection, was betraying her. The moral dilemma that instantly presented itself felt impossibly heavy. Do I approach them? Do I confront him? Or do I tell Skyler, shattering her carefully constructed sense of security? My first instinct, the fiercely protective one, was to march in there and expose him. But then the pragmatic part of me took over. What good would that do? It would create a scene, humiliate Skyler by proxy, and likely cause more pain than resolution. And what about my own burgeoning, complicated feelings for Skyler? Would revealing this truth be perceived as an act of friendship, or something more manipulative? The thought brought a fresh wave of self-recrimination. I stood there for a long moment unmoving, the bustling city fading into a distant hum. The scene inside the cafe, vivid and cruel, was burned into my memory. The path ahead felt suddenly fraught with unseen consequences, each option a landmine. I walked away from the cafe, my book forgotten, the lightness of the afternoon replaced by a profound unease. The secret I now carried felt like a heavy stone in my gut, an unwelcome burden that I knew would not easily be dismissed. My quiet world had just been irrevocably and unwillingly complicated. The days that followed my unwelcome discovery were a blur of internal conflict. I moved through my professional duties at the clinic with my usual composed efficiency, but beneath the surface, a storm raged. Every interaction with Skyler became a silent agony. I observed her bright, open demeanor, her easy laughter with the animals, completely unaware of the shadow looming over her life. The thought of what I knew, the secret burning like a low fire in my gut, felt like a betrayal in itself, a weight pressing down on my chest. The tension in my shoulders became almost palpable. I found myself clenching my jaw, my hands sometimes shaking almost imperceptibly as I performed delicate procedures. My mind, usually so focused on the task at hand, was constantly veering back to the image in the cafe window, replaying it, dissecting it, trying to find a way out of the moral quagmire I was in. How could I tell her? How could I possibly inflict such pain on someone I had grown to care for so deeply? And how could I live with myself if I didn't? The questions cycled endlessly, offering no easy answers. I tried to convince myself that it wasn't my place, that it was Mark's responsibility, or that perhaps it was a misunderstanding. But the vividness of what I had seen, the intimate gestures, the shared laughter, left no room for rationalization. The truth, stark and undeniable, was an unwelcome burden that threatened to suffocate me. Finally, after a particularly long and emotionally draining surgery late one evening, the clinic settled into its familiar, quiet hum. The last patient had gone home, the instruments were sterilized, and the cleaning finished. Only Skyler and I remained, a comforting silence typically filling the space between us. But tonight, the silence felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken words. Skyler was meticulously organizing patient files, her light brown hair falling softly around her face as she concentrated. I watched her for a moment, the picture of quiet dedication. My decision, though agonizing, had solidified. I couldn't let her continue in ignorance. It wasn't fair, and it certainly wasn't right. Taking a deep breath, I walked over to where she was. "Skyler," I began, my voice lower than usual, carefully modulated to keep any unsteadiness out of it. "Can we talk for a moment?" She looked up, her soft brown eyes meeting mine, a flicker of mild surprise in them. She set down the file she was holding. "Of course, Willa. Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said, though my throat felt tight. "But there's something I need to tell you." I chose my words with agonizing care, wanting to be truthful without being gratuitous, to convey the information with as much kindness as possible. I described what I had witnessed, the location, the general time, omitting any unnecessary details, focusing solely on the indisputable facts. Skylar's initial reaction was a blank stare, as if she hadn't quite processed my words. Her face, usually so composed, slowly paled. Then, a dawning comprehension, a quiver that started in her lips and spread softly through her entire frame. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken grief and the shattering of a quiet world. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, began to glisten. I didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes or apologies. There was nothing I could say to lessen the blow. Instead, I simply offered a steady presence. I reached out, my hand resting gently, lightly, on her arm, a quiet anchor in the sudden storm that had just erupted around her. Her skin felt cool beneath my touch, but I kept my hand there, a silent promise of support. The quiet truth hung between us, a raw wound in the evening air. Skylar's heartbreak manifested not as an explosion of anger or tears, but as a quiet, profound retreat. The initial shock gave way to a deep sadness that settled over her like a heavy cloak, muting her usual gentle vibrancy. Her movements became a little slower, her voice softer, and while she still performed her duties with her customary competence, the lightheartedness that had begun to blossom between us faded, replaced by a visible fragility. She seemed to exist in a private world of pain, accessible only in hushed, hesitant whispers. I became her unwavering support, a silent, steady presence. There were evenings when, after the clinic had emptied, she would simply sit in the break room, staring out the window, and I would stay, just making sure she wasn't alone. Sometimes, I would find myself at her small apartment after work, ostensibly to drop off some paperwork or discuss a patient, but truly just to be there. I'd make tea, a soothing herbal blend she favored, and offer a quiet presence, allowing her to process her grief at her own pace. Slowly, incrementally, Skyler began to confide in me. Her words were raw, hesitant whispers, punctuated by long silences. She spoke of her confusion, the shattering of her trust, the disbelief that someone she had loved and trusted could inflict such a wound. She questioned everything, her voice laced with pain and a profound sense of disorientation. I don't understand," she'd murmur, her gaze distant. "How could he? What did I miss?" I listened, my own heart aching for her suffering, a dull throb beneath my ribs. It was a strange, complicated ache, tinged with a keen awareness of the growing intimacy that her vulnerability fostered between us. Each shared silence, each soft confession, pulled us closer, weaving our separate threads into a tighter, more intricate pattern. During these quiet evenings, I carefully avoided any action that could be misinterpreted. My focus was solely on offering comfort, on creating a safe space for Skyler to grieve without judgment or pressure. I poured her tea, brought her a blanket, or simply sat beside her on the worn sofa, offering a quiet, anchoring presence. My hand might rest briefly on her shoulder, a small, reassuring gesture of solidarity, but nothing more. It was important, I felt, to honor her pain and the fragile trust she was extending to me. I noticed the subtle ways Skyler began to lean on me, not physically but emotionally. Her gaze, once distant, would now occasionally seek mine, searching for reassurance, for understanding. When a new wave of sadness would wash over her, she'd instinctively turn towards me, a silent plea for solace. I felt the profound weight of her trust, a sacred responsibility. In those moments, watching her fragile strength, I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within me, that I would do anything to help her navigate this difficult journey, to help her find her way back to herself. The quiet strength I offered was all I could give, but I gave it freely, wholeheartedly. Weeks folded into a month, then another. Slowly, incrementally, Skyler began to emerge from the deepest shadows of her grief. The acute pain had softened, though a quiet melancholy still lingered in the corners of her eyes. She started to laugh more, a genuine, if still sometimes fragile, sound. She noticed my steadfast presence, the unwavering strength I offered through the quiet, consistent acts of support. I saw her observing me too, her gaze holding a new depth of understanding, a quiet gratitude that hummed between us. One particularly crisp autumn evening, after a full day at the clinic, we were back at her apartment. We had been talking for hours, sifting through the layers of betrayal and the lingering questions about trust. Skyler had voiced her fears about trusting again, about opening herself up to potential hurt. "It's like, how do you even start over?" she'd asked, her voice small, a fragile vulnerability hanging in the air. How do you know who to believe?" The question hung there, suspended between us, heavy with unspoken possibilities. The intimacy of the moment, the raw honesty of her vulnerability, felt overwhelming. I looked at her, at the way the soft lamplight illuminated the delicate curve of her jaw, the earnestness in her eyes, and I knew, with a sudden, profound clarity, that I couldn't contain the truth any longer. The words, long suppressed, felt ready to burst forth. My voice was low, almost a murmur, a steady rhythm in the quiet room. "Skyler," I began, my gaze fixed on hers, determined to convey every ounce of sincerity. "You asked how you know who to believe, how to trust again. I can't promise you anything about the future or about other people, but I can tell you this." I paused, gathering my resolve, feeling the soft tremor of my own vulnerability. "What I feel for you, it's not just friendship. It hasn't been for a while now." Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, then a slow, dawning comprehension, a quiet recognition of the unspoken undercurrents that had flowed between us. A blush rose subtly on her cheeks, but she didn't look away. My heart hammered a soft, insistent rhythm against my ribs. "I know," I continued, my voice barely audible, "that this is a lot. Especially now. But I had to tell you. I admire your strength, your kindness, the way you care so deeply. And being near you, working with you, it's become something vital to me." I saw the way her lips parted slightly, a soft intake of breath. The silence that followed stretched, profound and expectant. Every beat of my heart felt magnified, echoing in the quiet room. I searched her eyes, desperate for some sign, some indication of how she was truly feeling. There was no anger, no shock, just a deep, thoughtful processing. In that moment of profound intimacy, bathed in the soft glow of the lamp, I felt an undeniable pull. It was a leap of faith, a silent prayer. I leaned in, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. My gaze held hers, asking a question without words. And then, a soft, tentative press of our lips. It was brief, a whispered question, a silent offer of something new, something fragile and full of hope. Her lips were soft, a gentle yielding. I pulled back slightly, my eyes still searching hers. Skyler did not pull away. Instead, her hand, hesitant at first, reached out, her fingers lightly touching my arm, a silent, eloquent gesture that spoke volumes. The kiss had been a question, and her touch, a quiet, profound answer. The lingering silence after the kiss was not empty. It was pregnant with possibility, a fragile space where our two worlds had just converged. Skylar's hand, still resting lightly on my arm, was a tangible connection, a quiet acceptance. Her eyes, which had widened with surprise, now held a deep, thoughtful warmth, a reflection of the unspoken emotions that had passed between us. She didn't speak immediately, and neither did I. We simply existed in that moment, absorbing the profound shift that had just occurred. Her response, or rather her lack of refusal, felt like a quiet, hesitant invitation. It wasn't a fervent embrace, but a gentle reaching out, a silent affirmation that this was not unwelcome. The vulnerability I had exposed felt raw, but in her gaze, I found not judgment, but a mirrored tenderness. Our subsequent conversations were soft, earnest, spoken in hushed tones as if navigating uncharted territory. We talked late into the night, exploring the delicate contours of our feelings, our hopes, and our fears about this new, unexpected connection. Skyler spoke of the confusion she'd felt even before Mark's betrayal, the way she had unconsciously sought my steady presence, the comfort she found in my quiet understanding. She confessed to her own unspoken admiration, the way she had observed my dedication, my empathy, and the quiet strength she now saw in a different light. I, in turn, articulated the liberation I felt, a lightness I hadn't realized I craved, having finally given voice to the feelings I had guarded so fiercely. It felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders, allowing me to breathe more freely. I spoke of the gentle connection I'd felt, the way her presence had quietly transformed my world. The transition from friendship to something more felt delicate, requiring careful steps. It wasn't a sudden, passionate plunge, but a slow, deliberate unfolding. We were both cautious, Skyler navigating a new kind of trust after her recent heartbreak, and I, venturing into a depth of emotional connection I hadn't allowed myself before. But our shared understanding, the undeniable current that had always flowed between us, now amplified and acknowledged, provided a strong, resilient foundation. There were moments of quiet, tentative affection, a shared smile that held a deeper meaning, a hand brushing hers over a patient's chart that lingered a fraction of a second longer, a sustained gaze across the clinic that spoke volumes without a single word. Each interaction became imbued with a new layer of significance, a quiet affirmation of the path we were beginning to tread. We committed to exploring this new path, acknowledging the beautiful, quiet risk it entailed. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual understanding that what we were building was precious and deserved every ounce of our careful attention. It felt like starting a new chapter, not just in our lives, but in the story of us. My clinic, my quiet world, was no longer just a sanctuary for animals. It was also becoming a sanctuary for a love I hadn't dared to dream of, a testament to unexpected connections and the healing power of genuine affection. The quiet strength between us was growing, day by day, affirming our bond. Time unfurled, revealing the gentle strength of our burgeoning relationship. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow, deliberate bloom, rooted in mutual respect and a profound understanding that had been cultivated over months of shared work and quiet empathy. Our connection deepened, marked by small, knowing gestures that spoke volumes without words. A shared glance across the treatment room, a soft touch of my hand on her back as we passed in the corridor, a comfortable silence that no longer felt empty, but full, rich with unspoken affections and shared histories. Willa's animal sanctuary, once my singular focus, now felt like a collaborative dream. Skylar's presence had always enhanced it professionally, but now, her quiet joy, her renewed laughter, infused the very air of the clinic with a different kind of warmth. I, once so guarded, found myself more open, a subtle lightness in my step, a quiet joy illuminating my eyes that even my longtime clients, ever observant of their vet, occasionally remarked upon. My dark hair was still often in a bun, but sometimes I found myself letting a few strands fall free, a small, unconscious shift in my own carefully constructed persona. Skyler, in turn, found renewed resilience. The sharp edges of her heartbreak had softened, replaced by a quiet strength. Her laughter, once hesitant, was now more genuine, bubbling up from a place of true contentment. She still possessed a profound gentleness with animals, but now that same tenderness extended more freely to herself and to me. She was healing, piece by painstaking piece, and I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction in witnessing her transformation, knowing I had played a part in helping her find her way back to herself. Our evenings together became a cherished ritual. Sometimes we would discuss the day's challenging cases, our professional minds still intertwined. Other times, we would simply sit, reading quietly, the comfortable weight of her presence beside me a balm to my soul. We learned to navigate the nuances of each other's thoughts, anticipating moods, offering comfort or space as needed. We spoke of our dreams, both individual and shared, sketching out the tentative contours of a future that now seemed boundless with possibility. There was a quiet intensity in our shared moments, a deep current of emotion that needed no grand declarations. One quiet evening, months after that first tentative kiss, we sat together on the sofa in her apartment, a comfortable silence settling between us as the last rays of twilight faded from the window. The soft glow of a single lamp cast long shadows across the room. There was no need for conversation, no urgent topic to address. The silence was not empty, but full, rich with unspoken understanding and the profound peace that had settled into our lives. I simply reached for her hand, my fingers lacing naturally with hers. Her skin was warm, familiar. It was a simple, profound affirmation of our bond, a quiet promise exchanged without words. Our love story, forged in empathy and quiet courage, was just beginning. It was a testament to how an unexpected connection, born from professionalism and kind intention, could blossom into something deeply meaningful, capable of healing old wounds and building a new foundation. We had found each other in the quiet hum of a veterinary clinic, two souls drawn together by a shared purpose and a slowly dawning affection, and in doing so, we had both found a different kind of sanctuary, a lasting home in each other's hearts. The path ahead was still unfolding, but walking it together, I knew, was a journey I was finally ready to embrace, completely and utterly.